The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands, and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
WESN.
Respect is a very strange thing. We all, to some extent, believe we deserve it. Some people think they're entitled to it. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, outside of respect of a basic human being and respecting them as an individual, basic human rights, to what extent is it owed? And because I don't necessarily think respect is owed, it means that when it is granted, it means so much more. One of the interesting things that our local politicians, usually it's Dr. Heath Rowley, but I would argue you could probably put anybody in this position and the results would more or less be the same, is the comparisons to some of our regional neighbors and the respect that they seem to have, not just from their own population, but also from the international community. Of course, the biggest example of that is Mia Mottley in Barbados. Prime Minister Mottley has, the last time we could have had a direct comparison, let's just say the international community showed up for her, didn't necessarily show up for our Prime Minister. And again, one could argue, in my opinion, you could put whoever from our parliament in that spot, from our parliament, not just from the PNM, and you will get a similar result. Because at the end of the day, there are certain qualities of a leader, how you communicate, how you carry yourself, how you deal with situations, if you could do so with grace, if you could do so with elegance, if you could do so wisely to minimize the damage and to maximize gains, to maximize the message and to minimize the distractions. And normally, that's not something that can be done. And why is that? Well, I would argue it's because we don't necessarily have great competition. We don't necessarily care about merit. And we don't reward people for doing the right thing or doing the better thing. We reward people for doing what we want them to do, and then we complain when they do it. Because when what we want them to do doesn't necessarily lead us to the promised land, it's not our fault, it's their fault for giving us what we want. We want the freeness, and then we want to complain, you see what they do, boy? They set us up to fail. They waste we money. Well, yes, some of it is corruption, and some of it is giving the people what they want. Because the people don't want, too many of us don't want to voice their opinion. And because there isn't much competition, because we don't demand excellence, we end up essentially with mediocrity from a group of people who could probably do better, but they have no motivation to do so. And then, as time goes on, the situation devolves. As it's human nature, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So, eventually, those who go into politics, they won't just settle for doing whatever it is that would be enough to placate the population. They'll start to become more ambitious. How far could they push things? How far could they take advantage of a system where the population seems to turn a blind eye to everything? And then we end up with political instability, whether we realize it or not, whether we like it or not. Or maybe not political instability. Maybe it's organizational instability due to, in many cases, a lack of leadership. Leadership works both ways. There are the leaders, and then there are the followers, and then there are the people in between who have to balance a complicated act of leading, both formally and informally, while following. Because the political leaders of parties, obviously they're leaders, but to some extent they also have to balance following the desires of the people. Being servants first in a way while being leaders. It's more complicated than it looks. It's as complicated as it sounds. And that's why we don't necessarily see it being practiced well enough here. To be fair, it's not as though other places are perfect. But let's not study about what other people have or do not have, but rather study what we need. Obviously, the people, the voters, for the most part are followers until it's time to vote, and then to some extent in that very moment, as a collective, they are the leaders, because it is their will that selects who is put in charge. And the people in between now, who is that? It's a balancing act, I said, on all levels. But the ones in the middle, they're always having to balance things out. And now there's one article in one of the daily newspapers where a former UNC MP, I believe, is quoted as saying that the people that surround her are telling her what she wants to hear, not the truth. And they can't tell her the truth because the majority of them have nothing without leaning on her shoulders. They have become her emotional prop, but her political grave diggers. And the sentiments that he's expressing is that they're setting her up to fail. That she is the emperor with no clothes, and all they could do is tell her how great her gown is wearing. Her gown is. Now the question is exactly whose fault is it? Because I do think to some extent, this is a very common thing. We hear rumors of it happening in China, happening in Russia. To some extent, it could have been happening in Washington. To some extent, that could have been part of the problem why George Bush Jr. went into Iraq. When people stop telling you what you need to hear because they're dependent on you to dole out power and authority and privilege and benefits, so you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you, but you lack the fortitude to understand there's a difference between attacking the person and supporting them with constructive criticism. A real friend is not just going to tell you what you want to hear and let you walk into a trap. A real follower at some point is going to have to bring up objections when the need arises. It's a balancing act. Even in the professional field, how many bosses don't want to hear contradicting words from their subordinates until at such time when, why you didn't warn me that things were going to blow up, things weren't going to work out, and then they want to blame the subordinate who was only doing what the boss wanted them to do. only saying what the boss wanted them to hear. And maybe I'm being a little too hard on our people because this is an advanced thing. This is not something unique to us that is a basic thing that should be easy to resolve. And why is it that we can't overcome such a basic? It's not basic. It's around the world. It may lead to wars or the toppling of governments. This is an important and serious thing. Throughout history, these things have been very present, but usually they are present in governments that are not always operating at a healthy clip, at a healthy pace, in a healthy way. And I'm giving an example of the opposition leader. Now we have to ask to what extent is that true in other political parties, including the one that is running the government right now. Now, the exercise that we have seen that the government has gone through, one which potentially, at least the parts that were played out to the public, were not completely necessary, but that's my opinion from an outsider with the benefit of hindsight to some extent, right? But we've seen where they had disagreements and they haven't imploded yet, to borrow a phrase from the Minister of Finance. But to what extent does the yes man and yes woman exist in our government? Because it exists in the party in waiting, why should we assume that it won't be in the PNM? It could be in the NTA, it could be in HOPE, it could be in the COP, it could be in the PEP, it could be in the TPP. One of the disappointing things about our politics is the fact that it's one thing for one organization to have some feelings. And then the idea would be, well, we would look around the environment. Okay, you have these feelings, you have those feelings. Which one could we compensate for, deal with? Which one is the most appropriate for us to tolerate in the moment? Maybe you're not good at certain organizational skills, but we need someone not so much to be administrators, but to be decisive to deal with crime. And the bureaucracy is something that maybe might have to take a back seat. Not everybody is going to be good at everything. So different failures comes with different strengths. But in TNT, more often than not, the failures, the bad behavior, the disappointments are too similar. They don't differentiate themselves. It's almost like if they find comfort in making similar mistakes, in falling back to the lowest common denominator. And that's one of the reasons why people complain, well, we don't really have a choice. It's the same thing, as much as some of my callers and others would disagree. This thing about yes man and yes woman, I've seen it up close and personal in a limited capacity, in an anecdotal example, with one cabinet member at the time, where the tone of the individual speaking, now I don't necessarily have the full context of the relationships of the speaker to the cabinet member, but it made me think, this is sounding a bit like a yes man, as opposed to someone with objective judgment, giving sound advice, steering the member of cabinet in a direction, because potentially it seemed as though that's the direction the member of cabinet wanted to go, and he just needed someone to reassure him. Now, in this case, the decision was not that, the stakes of the decision were not that great. We're not talking about policy decisions here. But to what extent does it exist in our society, and it holds us back? Because far too often, too many of us, not just the functionaries and the assistants and the advisors, but too many of us, we're not willing to point out the fact that our Prime Minister, whoever it is at the time, has no clues. And that, at that point, we can't necessarily blame them, because we're giving what power we do have to them. Sean Marcus Small here. This is Talking About WESN, Content Capital. Let's take a break. When we come back, we should run through a couple of topics of daily review, and then maybe we will welcome my co-host. Stay tuned to Talking About WSL. We'll be right back after this.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, Meinl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. Just want to acknowledge, of course, our very own Marshall Montano was on NPR's Tiny Desk. I heard some of his performances. I mean, came off pretty well musically, vocally, and it's both something to be proud of, but then there's a hint of regret in the fact that, to some extent, what could have been if we took our art form a bit more seriously, as opposed to having to settle for the private endeavors. Imagine if we supported soca more, not just as an art form to drive our fetting culture, but as a true art form. How much sooner something like this could have happened, and how much greater of a world stage our music and culture could have been on already. Also, shout out to Etienne Charles, fellow Fatima alum, always doing great things with rhythm and brass and everything in between. One of the best musicians coming out of TNT. Best of luck to all involved in future endeavors, and hopefully this is just the beginning of more things to come. Now, with that out of the way, let's kick off today's Daily Review. One of the first things that caught my attention, and it made the front page of at least one of the daily newspapers that carried the story. I find it to be very ironic, and a lot of people might view it very cynically and potentially want to give the Prime Minister a hard time for it, which I can't completely fault them for, but what am I speaking about? The Prime Minister, apparently, in part of the debate over the SOE, he basically said, look, police officers, some, not all, some, well, it seems as though they want to hide in police stations and stay away from the criminals. The quote is, so when officers are in the police stations, it has come to my attention in some districts, in some instances, police officers whose job it is to protect us and secure us, in some districts at night are so afraid of the criminals that they close the police station door, turn off the lights, and be inside there hoping the criminals don't come at them. Now, I'm not entirely sure exactly what anecdotal examples the Prime Minister had been told or saw for himself to give this statement. So I can't necessarily say that it's not entirely true. All it takes is for there to be one example for it to be true. And one would assume you're not going to be afraid if this is true. One night out of the year, they just for whatever reason, ketchup is like, oh, we're afraid, and we lock up shop and try and hide from criminals, right? No, probably this could be something that's ongoing in at least one police station. Now, again, we don't know what police station it is. We don't know the context is. We don't even know if it's true or not. But to some extent, not because I have an issue with the TTPS, although I do have issues with the TTPS, but because I do believe, going back to one of the things that Ashraf, as then media ambassador, maybe a year or two ago mentioned, both for criminals and for police officers, and which I have modified for even politicians. But in this case, let's focus on the police officer aspect of it. They come from our society. They come from us. This is not something that is unbelievable. Because in our society, one of the things, and this is something that's not unique to us, but, and I've brought it up before, not every police officer is there because of the vocation to protect and serve. They are there to collect a check. It's a job. And at some point, if the risks outweigh the benefits, it's a job they probably would leave, at least if they could. Some officers prefer to ride a desk. They don't want to face the dangers of going out there and interacting with people, the risks involved of having to make judgment calls, and dealing with violent confrontations if the need arises. But to what extent do we have that in our police service where some people stay hidden in stations? I don't know for sure. I do know that I have seen negative interactions with officers in stations. In fact, more often than not, the negative interactions I have had have been with the officers at the stations, not necessarily the officers at patrol. Now, I've seen officers stereotype a friend of mine, but that's a whole different story. At least I could say that they were actively trying to do something, even though it was a negative stereotype, but c'est la vie. As opposed to those in a station who, they're annoyed that you've come to give them work to do, as though that's not what they paid for. But I digress. Therein lies why I do wonder to what extent what the Prime Minister said is true, literally, and to what extent what the Prime Minister is saying is more for dramatic effect. And it's not necessarily the motivations that we should be concerned about, but rather the actual fact that, hey, maybe there is, a subsection of the police service that likes to just stay hidden away in the police stations. And maybe he was just exaggerating things on the locking up and closing off the lights and hiding from the criminals because they're afraid, right? There might not actually be examples that the police officers are hiding in the darkness at night in their stations because of fear, but examples of officers hiding, well, not so much hiding, but refraining from doing anything but just staying in the station. Because of laziness, maybe? And fear could be relative. It's not that they're hiding in the darkness. The lights could be on, the doors could be open. Now, one of the reasons why I think the Prime Minister wanted to put that motivation on the behavior of police officers is he pointed to the fact the murder in December that was right in front of the Besson Street police station. He basically acknowledged the fact that, look, they had citizens identifying themselves as lawbreakers choose as their place of attack to be in front of a police station inside the city and to carry out an attack using the most sophisticated killing weapons. It tells you they have no regard for law enforcement in our society. This is a double-edged statement that the Prime Minister is giving for him. Because to what extent now would some people use this against him? I know the opposition leader has, but I think the opposition leader is kind of not being specific or enough or speaking in a manner which I would be willing to say it's 100% in good faith. Maybe I'll get to that later. The thing is, at the end of the day, the Prime Minister is admitting that the situation is bad. Well, the problem is, technically, you've been the one in charge in the last 10 years. And as if to emphasize the point, a teenager was gunned down in front of the Four Roads police station in Diego Martin last night. It happened again during a state of emergency. Now, of course, some police officers are going to feel defensive over statements like this, right? And the Police's Social and Welfare Association president, he said he had no reports of any such incident. They would have to be addressed, these matters would have to be addressed by the Commissioner of Police, Deputy Commissioners, etc., etc. Doesn't want to speak about it, can't necessarily go to defense about it, but there's no, and this is the thing that I believe sometimes groups need to understand, because we do it for politicians, right? Why do politicians only defend their side and not admit to the failures of their side? Well, then it makes them look as though they're heavily biased, can't be objective, and everything they say, we then have to take with a pinch of salt. It's similar for the unions, and you might say, well, what, you expect the unions not to defend the people? Well, to some extent, yes, because if the behavior of the members of the union is detrimental to the organization that is their employer, they run the risk of essentially messing with the employer's capacity to employ them. And to some extent, the union would have a responsibility to its own membership to ensure that its own membership does not act in a manner that's detrimental to the employer to the extent that it will affect their employment. Maybe I just see things differently. Because the Prison Association Union President, Gerard Gordon, he is complaining that only junior officers are being subjected to searches during the current state of emergency. And he's calling for all officers to undergo searches. And not a lot of people might like him saying that, particularly prison officers. But hey, let's not hide reality here. Who honestly thinks that there isn't some amount of corruption in the prison service? It's not as though the criminals man the gates and all the points of entry and egress into prisons, and that's how stuff gets smuggled in. I think there's a story that marijuana was found in a box of food, marijuana and a cell phone or something like that, underneath the food in a container that a prison officer, I believe, was trying to bring in. I could be misquoting the story. I don't want to look for it right now. When you try to, kind of cover up the obvious. I'm not saying all prison officers are bad, just like how all police officers are not bad. But the fact of the matter is, we can't just pull the wool over our eyes and hope that the problem goes away. We have to deal with the problem. And I think here we have one association president saying, listen, we need to get our act together before this whole thing implodes in our face. Meaning the prison officers. And then now, if we think there's corruption, why are we going to limit it to the ground level? And we need to understand, corruption comes in different forms. It's not as though there's like a gang within the prison service and a gang within the police officer, and all of the corruption is linked and tied to one organization that's all, doing the same thing with the same motivations, working for the same people. No, some of it could be for this set of criminals, some of it could be for another set of criminals, and then some of it could be corruption that will present differently with different motivations, not necessarily for criminals. It could be trying to do things for prisoners who are not affiliated with the gangs, trying to do things for their family members, trying to do things for their friends. Who knows? Trying to do things for money as a mercenary. All of these things could happen. The fact of the matter is, to some extent, those who are clean would benefit from actions that would help ensure that the services are clean. And with regards to the police, back to the police, why one of the things I am somewhat disappointed with the police services stakeholders is the unwillingness to be more proactive when dealing with issues of accountability at a time when the consequences of a lack of accountability, this is what a lack of accountability looks like. These are the results. Now, to some extent, that's the government's fault. To some extent, that's the senior members of the police services' fault. To some extent, it's our fault. We could exercise our responsibilities to some extent just with how we voice our opinions. If we do so effectively and responsibly, it will be a lot better than just shouting nonsense into the wind, but that's a whole other thing. And then there is also the upcoming elections. The government will voice its responsibilities or do its part with regards to the selection of the next commissioner of police. That's going to be coming up soon. It'll be interesting to see where they go with it. DCP Benjamin is head of operations or in charge of operations. Apparently he's more front and center than the commissioner himself. Not saying that he is next in line. From what I hear, he's not the one that the government necessarily wants, and may not be the one that even the Service Commission necessarily wants, or any other stakeholder for that decision. But he's the one front and center now, having to face the fire of the press and the media and the public's expectations now. And of course, the police service, which includes DCP Benjamin, DCP Martin, the Commissioner of Police, and others, the media ambassadors, the heads of the divisions, the heads of the stations, etc., etc. They all have to hold their subordinates accountable. And to what extent are they not? And at the end of the day, the population sees and feels things like what the Prime Minister essentially said. There are some officers in some instances, in some stations, who don't necessarily care to do policing. They just clock in, take the check, go about their business, and avoid responsibility as much as possible. One could take out the police in that statement and insert any ministry or state entity, and I beg the question, do you think that it is not true that there will be somebody in those organizations that will also act similarly? And to some extent now, then it goes beyond just the government, because this lack of accountability is systemic in our society. And it goes beyond the current administration. But we can look at the current administration for not trying to really do anything about it within the last 10 years, or at least within the last 5. Because from what I understand, at least at some point between around 2018 to 2021, some work was being done within the police service by a then commissioner and his Minister of National Security. But I don't know to what extent accountability was being demanded within the ranks of the police service, but also the rest of the Ministry of National Security. So I'll leave that there. The Prime Minister revealing this, I appreciate it. I myself am not entirely sure what I'm supposed to, what angle I'm supposed to take, what tone I'm supposed to take when speaking on this. Because on one hand, I want politicians to be willing and able and upfront to reveal things, to speak the reality of what's going on, as opposed to trying to say, oh, well, you know, our economy is great. Look, all of these, we're stable. We're stable. Look how stable we are. But the flip side is, this is indirectly an admission to not being effective enough. And forgive me for taking the assumption that I could say not being effective enough, because over, you know, record-breaking year of made us. That, what else could I say? 600 is a lot of people to die in a population of 1.5 million. When Oakland had 100+ murders, their media was like record-breaking murders at 100 and something. I was like, we beat you. We have 4 times more than that. Come on, man. Now, we have more challenges. We don't have a big brother. It's not so easy to call in help. It isn't. We have had important people be assassinated. And it seems as though we really don't have the capacity to deal with it, and the political will to ask for the help to back us up. And until we do, things like this is the trickle-down effect. Officers not wanting to leave the station. Not all officers, but think about it. How many of you out there have complaints of the police officers not wanting to do their job? Moreover, noise pollution is just one example. Just one example. Both of the callers yesterday essentially spoke about some version of that. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue with the topics today. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus, quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, one of the ongoing questions is how effective has the SOE been really? It's a question that opposition MPs brought up in the debate over the SOE. One of the questions is, I guess you could say long term, what the effect is going to be having, right? One opposition MP, Dennis Ramali, he argued, I would want to know that having deployed the heaviest ammunition in your arsenal, is it the heaviest? Arguably, yeah. Suspending of rights is kind of heavy, might just be the heaviest, right? That it would work. So I want to know that this SOE will target the criminal elements in a way that we have never been able to treat with the issue of crime before. I maintain my stance that the issue of crime is an issue that affects all of us, so we need all hands on deck. Now, one of the things is, again, how does this, in the long run, help? Right? That's one of the questions. How does it not just suppress the crime? Yeah, the murder rate has been suppressed, at least to some extent. But how does it deal with crime in the long run? Because one of the things that has come up is the opposition is saying, oh, well, what's the difference some of the things that's in the state of emergency, we are already laws on the books. And the difference, it seems that the government is pointing to is, yes, we know that the things in the state of emergency that are illegal are already illegal on the books. The things in the regulations. The point is, rights have been suspended, so to some extent the burden of proof for certain things are no longer on the state. It's not necessarily innocent until proven guilty, which, when I read that, I was kind of like, I don't know about that one. That to some extent worries me. Now, with regards to the effectiveness of the SOE, because arguably, yes, if the same things are illegal, what is the difference besides the suspension of rights? And then, to what extent, because this is bound to be a concern by many stakeholders, is this going to be a repeat of 2011? In fact, the government themselves argued 2011, you suspended the rights of people, you arrested them. They sued, many whom the arrest did not hold up, eventually sued the state and won. More importantly, the state of emergency did not have any long-term effect on crime. The damage to the economy did not provide any long-term benefits. And that's the thing. When it comes to a society, you want to always look at the long-term health. You can't just look at the short-term, because the long-term health will exponentially affect so much more people down the line when you do anything to stunt the growth of your economy, stunt the development of your society. And to some extent, that state of emergency did that. Now, granted, it's kind of COVID would have also potentially wiped away many of the gains, maybe not. It's to what extent, look around TNT and ask yourself, in the last 20 years, how much progress have there been in various aspects of the private sector? Why does it feel as though to some extent we haven't necessarily grown that much anymore? Yeah, we have new malls coming up, but then old malls are potentially having to shut down slowly but surely because the demand for goods and services just aren't there. Now, apparently, the Minister of National Security has revealed that, and I want to get these figures, over 500 people have been arrested. 569. But only 137 people have been in custody. Some have been charged and released. Not entirely sure why that is. Because the court says, even though you arrest, you charge, and then they go about the normal businesses and you maintain your focus on the gang operations to deal with the gang problem. Like, then the 500 number doesn't really mean anything to me. Charged and released. 137 people are in custody, 137 people are off the streets. Potentially, the violence that they could have done has been prevented, at least for now, until whenever their day in court or before the tribunal comes up. So I am not entirely sure to what extent we should be banking on this to be a vehicle by which we could finally prosecute gang members for being in a gang, which technically is already illegal. Because if these charges can't stick, and they end up suing the state for $100,000 here and $100,000 there, like in 2011, and we don't have anything to suggest that things would necessarily be different, I don't necessarily want to even judge the state of emergency based on that. Because, again, the courts might look at the suspension of individual rights for certain arrests. They might not necessarily look too kindly on that in the long run. But my whole thing is the guns, and DCP Benjamin revealed, well, they've gotten 30 guns off the street, including what one newspaper identified as an M16. I would argue it's either an AR-15 carbine or an M4. It's somewhat semantics, but a carbine would be more easily concealable, and to some extent in our society, potentially more dangerous in some situations because of the shorter barrel. But that's just me being very technical and wanting to be accurate as opposed to not necessarily with the practical point that it was another rifle taken off the street, but only one. Everything else in that report was handguns, and one homemade shotgun. 30 guns in 15 days, 2 guns a day. If this pace could be maintained for the next 2 to 3 months, you'll get a couple hundred guns off the street. Is that good enough? Especially when some of these guns may be the dregs that's out there It could even be a tactic by the gangs, kind of put the lesser important stuff out there for them to find. Now, there's no gun amnesty. That we brought it up yesterday. And the gun amnesty, as ASP Arun said, they usually traditionally are not effective. But my thing is this. It's a state of emergency. We should be trying to go all out. Even if we get one gun off the street from a gun amnesty, I think it would be worth it. And I do wonder if one of the reasons why we don't have it, the Minister of National Security said they won't be pursuing a gun amnesty policy. And he said because it's not effective. Well, I would argue it's not just that because it's not effective, but perhaps also it might be difficult to get it through Parliament. It might be difficult to set up the legal framework. They put it in place, not to say that they intended to do it, but I think they wanted to keep the possibility open, and now it seems as though for little gain, they say it's not worth the political effort, not worth the political capital. Because based on what I understand how some of the reporting is, they may need opposition support to get such a thing through, unless I don't know if the DPP would be willing to facilitate it. And maybe they just feel that, look, it's not likely to happen. And they might even be pushed back by some quarters. Why are we giving them an amnesty for? We should arrest all of them. Well, arguably, at some point, if we want the guns off the streets, we, the citizens, have to be willing to provide the information. Because the police can't see everything that happens behind closed doors. They can't catch everything. They can't search every car. Now, granted, if the TTPS could literally go into every single house and search every single car and do it simultaneously, yeah, eventually they'll get everything. Who wants that, even if they could do it? I would argue a lot of people wouldn't want that. Because they'll say, well, why are you searching me for? Well, the fact of the matter is, the police can't take it for granted that X, Y, and Z have a clean record and are not involved in crime. They can't take it for granted, oh, you're the family member of a minister. Obviously, you're not involved in crime. They can't take that for granted, right? More on that story in a bit. This whole situation, Now, the opposition leader, she has a concern about the existence of the gun amnesty clause, even though the government is not pursuing it, and she wants an explanation why. I'm not even sure what to make of her position, because she's saying certain regulation gives draconian powers. You cannot go now and interfere with or trespass on powers given constitutionally to certain office holders. Like, I get it, we need the opposition to be a watchdog on things, but where is the all-hands-on deck approach to also try and get things done constructively? I haven't necessarily seen that. I will use the next story of an example, but to some extent, again, part of being a leader is not just sticking to whatever narrative your side has to be involved with, and kind of doing what is expected and what's the obvious and what's the most acceptable and what's the low-hanging fruit. The opposition can be proactive in their job. If the government is not doing enough, we don't just need the opposition to say that the government is insufficient, we also need an alternative. Proactively, not just, well, it's not my job to tell the government how to function. If you publish good ideas out there, it will put more pressure on the government, because the public will be like, well, why we don't do this? The opposition will propose something that we think is a good idea. We might not know for sure how good or bad it is, but at least you need to tell us why we don't do this. But we don't have that. We don't have a debate on issues, because we don't have people giving different policy positions and approaches and recommendations based on their perspective. We just have, well, this is what the government doing now, and the opposition say it's bad. Because while we're at SOE, they are still part of Parliament. Where's the bilateral approach to crime fighting? I don't know, and it's somewhat disappointing. And I said I will use a story as an example. Before I get there, I just want to point out the whole thing about Diego Martin West. Let's move on to the next story. Digicel West, it's the seat of the current Prime Minister, Dr. Thrawley, and he said he's not going up for the seat again. And then when there was a report that there was sources that said that Amory Brown was looking to maybe take on that seat, first he said, well, he'll respond at a later date. Then he said on social media someone was up to political mischief. Only 4 sources to now reiterate, sources apparently close to Dr. Amory Brown, that he's looking to get the nomination, or he will accept, or is willing to accept being put up for nomination for Digicel West. My whole thing is, why did it seem as though, and I don't necessarily think that Dr. Brown did that entirely of his own volition, but why did it seem as though something came out in the media, and at some point Dr. Brown felt the need to reject it vehemently, with strong language. Someone is up to political mischief by saying a thing that sources close to me may or may not reveal in a couple of weeks to be true. What is with this running around story? And it was something similar where, you know, and we run around with the merit list, and then we had to put Gary Griffith back on the list. Why do these things happen? We run around with Stuart Young as Prime Minister, where publicly we say, well, we do it, and then it comes out, well, not everybody entirely understood what they were voting for, so we had to settle that, and it plays out in the public. Whereas all of that could have probably been settled with one conversation, or one conversation per stakeholder, before you come to us. Why do these things happen? Is it a lack of judgment, of proportionality? That said, this, just like how it was kind of almost disappointing that we get the whole run around only for Stuart Young to be essentially put forth as the heir apparent. What was the, you know, it's kind of disappointing. You're going to give us your run around to then just come back to the same point. I don't have an issue with Dr. Brown being nominated for Digicel West. It's the obvious choice. It's the natural choice. He's one of the senators who probably a lot of people would say, yeah, we would like to see him be an MP, because at the very least, he is one of the people who potentially could be Prime Minister. There are people who might want to see him in that spot and might want to see him do more than just be a senator. But we'll have to wait and see. I have no issues with this selection. I just don't know why we had to run around for. And again, I don't necessarily think he made the decision to put out that statement to vehemently deny, or maybe not deny, to say that the constituency office didn't contact him. And we point out the fact that, yeah, when you tip for something, it's usually not the formal channels that contacts you first. It's the informal ones, meaning the Prime Minister taps you on your shoulder and say, hey. But we'll wait and see how that plays out. Best of luck to Mr. Brown if he does officially get confirmed to be going up for that seat. And we'll leave that there. Now, the example that I want to get to with the next story. Being proactive. Maybe this is one of the issues, and this is one thing that I haven't brought up with the opposition before. You know, three to 4 years of talking about it, and I'm only now potentially bringing this up, and maybe that's on me. It's not necessarily enough to just criticize the government. One, you have to try and be constructive when you do it. Otherwise, you run the risk of being perceived as being biased and speaking in bad faith, and therefore people not necessarily taking you on. Regardless of your actual motivations, you have to be aware of the optics of what you say and do. It's not enough to just attack. Unless the other side is behaving in such a manner when you have no choice, which is not always the case. It can happen. It might have been the case in some instances throughout the last 2 to 3 years, but it's not always the case. But the other thing, again, and I brought up, is to be proactive in your messaging, to bring forth things that are not just criticisms of, well, the government bad. Because Gary Griffith, this is not the first time he's done it in recent memory, but I appreciate when he does these things because it shows a level of maturity and communication that I wish more politicians, some of them have it, and they're willing and able and have and are allowed to at times give out statements like this, but more often than not, the party machine suppresses things like this. Sometimes the leaders maybe give us hints of these things, but not enough and not to the extent. What am I speaking about? Well, the whole situation with Stuart Young has now brought back the old story from 2018 of his then stepdaughter being arrested in a house that contained $1 million or $2 million, a large, 3.8 million, I was underselling it, worth of cocaine. It was her and 2 other people in the house in West Moorings, a drug raid, December 4th, 2018. And Guy Griffith points out, he was commissioner at the time, he points out, please, stop bringing up this case to try to attack Stuart Young. Now, the people who want to attack Stuart Young, he is cautioning them because he's saying, you're not considering what you're doing to this young lady. Putting her name out there like this, keep bringing it up. Now, listen, I don't know if the girl is a good girl, a bad girl, a career criminal, if it was just a mistake. I don't know that for sure. But to some extent, I am not in a position to judge her. But by trying to use her as a vector of attack to Stuart Young, she will be judged. And it's who expects it to be benevolent and merciful, right? It will be negative. Now, maybe she does deserve it. Or maybe she doesn't quite deserve it. Or maybe she doesn't deserve it at all. This is one of the reasons why the court of public opinion needs to be very careful, because more often than not, the judgments from the court of public opinion are not based on facts, they're based on feelings and perception. And Gary Griffith is asking people, listen, let's not do this. Let's not do this because she was already arrested and now this is going to continue to demonize her. She has potentially already paid the price for what she may have done or not done. She could have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know how active she was in the situation. She might not even know any drugs were there. Who knows? I haven't followed the case, and to some extent, unless there's more to it that would be reported, it's not that important to me anymore in 2025. And the thing is, also, from what I understand, it's reported that, look, it's not as though Stuart Young is, yes, okay, he was her stepfather, right? But apparently, that link has more or less been severed. So again, trying to bring up someone who is now not considered family to him, as far as I understand, as a means of attack, I don't think it's right. And Gary Griffith even offered the fact that, look, I am technically related to her. I arrested her. I understand. But to try to use this to demonize her or you know, as a secondary thing. And he's coming up front with this. That's my point. Nobody asked him for this. And he's not looking to say, yeah, but Stuart Young bad. That's not the only thing in his vocabulary to attack. He is defending the young lady, but then he went on to say that, look, I worked with Stuart Young during this time, right? And it's not as though he has a glowing commendation, right, for Stuart Young. But he did say, in his capacity as Commissioner of Police, he worked with Stuart Young. And in his opinion, they made a good team. They were able to handle COVID. We were able to handle security. He provided me with the support, leadership, organizing meetings. I've seen him work in his capacity as a leader, and it is difficult for me to criticize him on it. And it is in line with things that I have heard with Stuart Young. Not all of what I have heard of Stuart Young, but some. One could argue that Gary Griffith, as a political opponent, should be not saying anything positive on Stuart Young at all. And I don't think this is Gary Griffith trying to say, all right, PNM, let's shake hands now and be friends with me. No. I think he's just being honest. Because either honesty is the best policy, and that's what he wants to be, or he thinks that this is just how I should present myself. I won't go any further because it might be seen as I am saying things in a negative light. I don't want to do that. He wanted to say, unfortunately, what we do in this country is we don't look at the quality of the person and how they perform. We will try to call them names, discredit the individual whose family would be arrested, and all the nastiness in politics. That's what we need to do, is judge individuals based on their performance and not based on the nastiness that you want. Individuals, judge them based on their performance. Now, some people like my colleague, Karina Shishera, don't judge Stuart Young very highly. Can't necessarily fault her for that. But to some extent, I understand where Gary Griffith is coming from, and I appreciate the fact that he's being somewhat proactive in what he's saying, because he's speaking out against the nastier side of our politics. It's not just about attacking. Because, and maybe he realizes, maybe he didn't. But if you foster an environment where it's about attacking and bacchanal, at some point it will blow back on you. If that is the environment that you help create, that you still have to operate in, then don't be surprised when the negative aspects comes against you. This is a very common trope or narrative in history. Cancel culture. Some people might have heard that term before. It was all happy and sunshine and rainbows for the people that promoted cancel culture until the standards were applied on them. And then they were like, no, but we're the good guys, right? We don't have to adhere to standards. The other side is the bad side. We don't have to adhere to standards. You can't apply that to us. And that's what happens in politics. I always thought that politicians refrained from doing certain things because they knew that it could come back and be applied to them. But more and more, I'm not entirely sure if they think that far ahead. And maybe Gary Griffith is, and maybe he isn't. But at the end of the day, he's behaving in a manner that I could appreciate as someone who looks at leadership and communication. And you might say, oh, sure, you're blowing smoke and this is nonsense. And listen, I'm not saying you need to like the man for it, I'm just saying I could appreciate his statements. Maybe there's more, maybe there's negative aspects of it, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I could appreciate them on the surface. Because at the end of the day, look, case in point, when you change the nature of how your political party operates and you get contractors to speak out against the administration and how the contracts are being awarded to certain Chinese firms, don't be surprised when the same contractor comes out and speaks out against the situation of contracts being awarded to Chinese firms in 2024. I'm just saying, what goes around comes around. Those who know, know. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines and close out the show. Stay tuned. It's talking about WSND Contact Capital. We'll be right back after this.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. I mean, and Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada in spite of the obvious difference in size.
We're back here and talking about WESN. Apologies, my co-host couldn't join me today. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to do so. I'm not entirely sure why. He was feeling a bit out of it, and that is before his own show this morning. So, you know, it is what it is. When in media, you try to push through, but at the end of the day, sometimes, you know, health or other practical reasons just doesn't allow you to. So I wish Keaton, well, hopefully it's nothing, you know, I mean, it's not anything serious, but, you know, hopefully it's something very, very minor and he'll be able to recover soon. With that said, now is the time we open the phone lines. You want to hear from you, you can call in and have your say. I know a lot of people, they might not like some of the topics, like some of the, and they might not have much more to say. To some extent, but kind of, in some of these things, we do have some amount of wait and see, right? Even with regards to the succession of the party, of the PNM, even with regards to certain aspects of the SOE, it's hard to judge these things because there's so much we have to still see how it shakes out to give us something definitive to speak about, right? But at the end of the day, I guess one of the things that I would ask is, what is it that you out in the public want to see come from this state of emergency specifically? My thing is that I hope that they're able to go after the guns, but I have to acknowledge the fact that to some extent, I don't know how easy it would be to get intelligence to get all the guns. Human intelligence would be necessary, tips, you know, informants, and in the environment where we've had prosecutors and people killed in front of police stations, I understand people would be hesitant to come forward with information, even if it's anonymous, because it could always be traced back to you. Who said anything? They don't necessarily need someone to reveal it. They could potentially just work it out. Well, these 6 people might have said something and they might go after all 6. I don't know, right? It's a hell of a way to live when you just don't feel safe in general, and then now you want me to give you information that could get me killed? I don't necessarily know if I want to do that. That is the unfortunate choice that our members of our population have to make. So that's what I would have hoped for the state of emergency, to go after the guns, even though it's not necessarily an automatic thing. I would hope that we get more guns off the street before the state of emergency ends. But what else do you want to see? I mean, one could argue state of emergency should allow for harsher enforcement of noise pollution laws and parking laws. We have caller from Shogunas. Good morning, caller, you're on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
I hear that sort of thing about the state of emergency, and I can't understand it. The claim is these cooks who holding up people and whatnot, these gangs. I have gone in detail and show you how the gangs came up in East Port of Spain and then spread out of the country, and what measures were taken, because it was found out at the time that it was the environment was causing it, and they put up saying they'd acquire all the old lands, and they started to lick down all the old buildings to pay the people for the property, and then they stopped knocking down the building. And those are where the problem lies. And nobody is doing anything. I don't see how the state of emergency could do anything. And if you give it a state of emergency, it was the last time to do the same thing. You have to be prepared from the time the state of emergency come out. You're going to the places where you expect the major problem. Nothing like that was done. Any questions, gentlemen?
I don't think so, caller. I don't think so.
What you think is I said wrong?
No. I'm just, so from what I understand, they're not dealing with the environmental conditions that cause the gangs to...
Why they're not dealing with it? If the research showed that that is the cause, why are you not dealing with it? That's my question.
That's a complicated question. I understand that question. I'll respond off air because we have another caller I'll have to take first. So if you feel you need to, you can always call back in. But thank you, Professor. We have Move on the line. Good morning, caller. Caller, good morning.
Good morning, Sean. No, I heard it on the phone, so I didn't hear it clearly. But I am inclined to agree with the professor when he's saying that. Come on. It seems to me and it's clear to me that this SOE wasn't well thought out before it was put into place. This is, first of all, Trinidad is a very small country, so you put an SOE in place, and then, like, you know, trying to decide what it is you want to do with it. But nonetheless, my main point for calling in, Sean, is this.
Yeah.
Dr. Keith Rowley continues to show that he's a callous, dismissive person who lives in his own world, and in that world, he is Lord and Master. He is nothing that happens negatively is his fault. It is the fault of everyone else. I mean, you come and you say publicly now that you hear that the police are locking up stations and hiding from the criminals, right? This is the same man that so callously, when he was announcing the removal of the restrictions for COVID, the man clearly said loud music can now be played. Again, this is Trinidad and Tobago. Only one person I'm aware of that asked him publicly in a letter. What you meant by that? What nonsense is that? This man actually encouraged the noise to get worse, but nobody seems to know that in the media, etc. But nonetheless, Sean, I'll just give you my little take on that situation with the police. I witnessed it myself. Went to the station 3 o'clock in the morning for a problem. Noise problem as usual. And the station was totally locked up. I was kind of confused. I say, but what is going on here? I study if I should turn away. So I am outside now calling and wondering if I had to be careful now because I might call and next you know somebody come out shooting. So I was in a mess. But nonetheless, it was the first time I experienced such. Knowing I'm living in this area all my life, going to the station, calling the station all hours, and then I get to realize from there, but wait, now they're locking up the station at night. I don't think they were locking up the station because they're hiding from criminals, Sean. These people were locking up the station, in my opinion, sleeping. But I will tell you something. The Prime Minister wants to discuss that and discuss it in such a way that he isn't somehow responsible, because I don't think that was happening when Gary was commissioner, and I will leave it at that. Have a good day.
Thank you, caller. Now, from what I understand, Gary had complaints over officers not doing the job, right? And they didn't always like that. It's one of the reasons why the two Canadians weren't popular, because the two Canadians had a different level of professionalism than some of the officers that served under them, and I'll leave that there. It's almost like if there are too many police officers, including seniors, some seniors, not all, because for whatever reason, the senior superintendent rank apparently has a lot of good officers, but then under and above that rank, there's a lot of questionable decisions and statements and actions taking place, right? I'll leave that there. But, you know, Gary had to face some of that as well, but I think that's why he proactively made it a point of emphasis to say publicly that police engagement to the public needs to be improved, that interaction, that police customer service needs to be improved. Statements that we do not really hear that much of from the current police executive, right? It's almost like if they don't necessarily know how to handle it, they don't want to be unpopular, they don't want to push. They don't necessarily, it's like if they're parents who spoil the children more than discipline the children, which is kind of crazy because they're not your kids, they're your subordinates who get paid to do a job that you're supposed to hold them to account to ensure that they do, but I'll leave that there for now. Here's the thing. The Prime Minister lives in his own world. To some extent, I have said something similar, like the political class and some of the upper tier business elites don't necessarily know what's going down at the ground level. Now, the Prime Minister will know on an academic level. He would read reports, but again, he will only know what's told to him. And to some extent, I don't think he has ever experienced it. Now, he might say, yes, but I came from nothing or whatever. I worked regular jobs as a young man, as a teenager, as a young adult. But that's not the same thing as what's going on in hotspots right now in 2024, 2025. That's not the same thing as what was going on in Tobago when he was 18 to 25. It's not the same thing. It's just not, right? So, and look, I will argue that I myself will only be aware of so much, and a lot of it is what I am told or what I read or what I hear. There are things that I will not be aware of, and there are certain parts of the country where now especially, in the past I may have been blissfully ignorant and to some extent stupid. I would have gone to certain areas where I probably should not have gone. But now there are certain areas where I just won't go because you don't know. You don't know. But to some extent I try, and I still see things about what's going on in the country, and I talk to people because I'm not Prime Minister, so I have the capacity to run into people on a day-to-day basis and ask them, you know, how are things? Whether it's a store owner or a store employee. And I don't think that our politicians do that. So to say that they live in their own world, to some extent that is true. I can't fault you for that. Now, here's the funny part. To say that it's callous. Ironically, I might argue to some extent, not 100%, but to some extent it's unintentional. Except the disregard that he has, it may not be mean-spirited, but it might be there. The lack of consideration for certain things he might be ignorant of, to some extent that actually could be evidence of it being callous. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. So it's not really to say, oh, it's unintentional, but yeah, it's unintentional because he's not actively trying to do it. But the reason why he's not actively trying to do it is because he's not really giving the situation the consideration that it deserves, right? So it's a subtle thing, but I'm actually going around in a circle, coming right back to where you are, where I do think too many of our politicians are callous. It's similar to when Keith Scotland mentioned the bike and the coal pot and all of that nonsense, right? I don't think he was trying to be mean, but he didn't realize by what he was saying that it was a callous remark because it was making light of everyday people's real struggles that he is not experiencing right now. Maybe he has family members and friends who are experiencing it, but he himself is not. And he's making light of that situation. Oh, look how easy it is. We'll just have to go back to the coal pot. And to some extent, a leader should know better. Not saying that everybody's perfect, right? But and it goes back to what you said. When you're the Prime Minister, at the end of the day, they want to take, oh, look what we did. Look at drag and gas, and what we did here, and what we did there, and how many hampers, and what we did for COVID, and what we did for this. All of these things they want to take credit for. Now, I would argue a lot of the responsibility on COVID is centered around the Ministry of Health, the CMO, the head of facilities, the epidemiologists, etc., and the Minister of Health to some extent. They were the ones that were up to the press multiple times a week. The Prime Minister came once and they came 2 to 3 times. When the economy is doing well, look how great we have it. And to some extent trying to gloss over the negative indicators of the economy. But when things are bad, it's never their fault. And that's not what leadership does. It's the reverse. And I know that there is some capacity to do it within this administration because I've seen it done at least by one individual. You take the blame. You don't take the credit. You give the credit to other people. That's a leader. That's not what we have. And to some extent, you want to take some credit, all right, fine, you're only human. But you can't try to absolve yourself of all blame. The people who are supposed to hold these officers to account, you are supposed to hold them to account. And if they are not doing if the officers are not being held to account, their superiors aren't doing their job. And if their superiors aren't doing their job, your job is to hold them to account so that it trickles down. We're not seeing that. The results at the end of the day, I can't fault Mova for saying what he said. I may not necessarily want to be as strong of a language, but at the end of the day, I have no problem being proven wrong, but I don't have any reasonable arguments to push back, so I have to agree. We have Stanford on the line. Good morning, Coley, on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
I want to go back, 3 quick comments. I want to go back closely to your program last week with ESP Ali.
Right.
Or ESPR Ali.
Well, technically it's inspector, because he was acting. So it's retired inspector.
Now, you know, that issue you all talked about, the issue of the, what do you call it, the recruitment that
yes.
that was that the Minister of Finance talked about in the budget at that time, 1,000 officers, and they were only able to get 200 out of 4,200 applicants, right? Which is 5%. And the article in the news, they had spoken about the psychometric testing was responsible mainly for flaking them out. It tells you how bad things are in this country. That out of 4,200 people, we were only able to get 200. It tells you, now if you understand what psychometric testing is, it tells you where the society is at a snapshot in that age group, because people applying there would be between, let's say, between 28 and, let's say, 18 and 28. So that's normally the age. And that's a snapshot of what is happening in the youths. We are in some serious trouble when it comes to that. Let me go ahead to what the professor talked about, this state of emergency and it being how it was handled, how it has been handled in terms of how they got here. And if you listen to Stuart Young yesterday and talked about when they get the proclamation to be signed by the president, whatever, the hour in the morning, Sunday morning, or whatever it's on Monday morning. You know, the state of emergency, I see it as the last big tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
The last big tool in the toolbox. And the way this has been implemented tells me that they don't know how to use the tool. They don't know how to use this tool, because it is embarrassing to see how this thing has come about. Firstly, the reason for it, and I do buy that reason. That reason about what happened in the police station in Besson Street, and then what the reprisal that the intelligence tell them, and then they have a state of emergency for that. Up to now, I ain't hear about no big, and I am in the know. I ain't hear about no big fish that they put, so-called big fish that they pull in that they take in, because you don't have any warrants. This is going to come to naught, in the sense that what people are expecting, we wouldn't get. And that is why they need to extend
people
it.
As any politicians or the population?
What the population is expecting.
I don't know if the population has expectations that high, to be honest.
No, of course we have expectations, Sean.
All right.
You don't want crime to go down?
No, I want crime to go down, but expectations of the SOE being effective.
Don't you want them to start to arrest people with two beginning guns and drugs?
Yeah.
Right, that's the expectation, but we're not going to see that. The last thing is this prison service. Our prison service manages 4 facilities: maximum security, the remand, Frederick Street, Carrera. And they consistently and persistently have these issues with drugs, phones, hit coming from the prison, all kind of stuff happening there.
Yeah.
It tells me that this prison service, one, they're not responsible enough, and they can't do the job. It is time that the state recognize this and bring in some foreign consultants here in the prison and tell us what needs to be done. If we need to get rid of the prison service and put it out for international tender and let people come in and run the prison, or show them how to run the prison.
Private.
If we have a joint thing where we have some foreign people come here overseeing how the prison is being run, because this thing can't be happening over and over and over and over again. That gentleman from the association that talked about low-level officers, only low-level officers being searched, with the insinuation that it is the other officers at the higher ranks that are bringing stuff into the prison. It is the same issue with the customs in Piaco, whereby it is time that they get rid of the green line in the airport. And you just put machines there, and every Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes through the airport have to put their bag through the scanner. Everybody. You can't, this thing about what you rely on, this is not an age for that. You put scanners and let everybody put their bag through there. It's the same thing in that you're talking about in the prison service. Everybody, don't care who you are, your vehicle's supposed to be searched, and your bag's supposed to go through a scanner. This is the problem. We have a problem with people in certain positions have to be get special privileges, and this privilege thing has to stop. This thing has to stop.
Yeah.
And this prison service, these officers, because this is not like the police where you're responsible for all of the security all over the country. This is just 4 facilities, and they can't manage it. They have shown us that they cannot do it. Prison commissioner after prison commissioner after prison commissioner has shown us that they can't run this thing properly. This time we break that up and try something new with it. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. I will say this. There is a temptation to, because you said foreign tenders, right? So I assume it would end up being potentially some private would be on the table. Not that that would be the goal. That has its own problems. Now, just because it has its own problems in our jurisdictions doesn't mean that we should outright discount it. I don't know. I think ultimately it doesn't necessarily matter who runs it. Ultimately, you will have the same problems if this underlying root cause continues, and that's a lack of accountability, right? Because if we have foreign partners that's eventually, without any sort of mechanisms to hold everybody to account, at some point it will be corrupted. It might take a while, right? It's one of those things where, you know, when you build a business and it's new, everything looks good. Can you maintain it? And one of the things to maintain a system of governance, a service of the state, is accountability. When it's new, everybody takes it seriously, and then eventually becomes old hat, and then people kind of start to take it for granted, and then you get what you get, right? But I agree with you, though. The prison service might actually potentially be in a much unhealthier position than the police service, because everything that happens is behind closed doors, and the population does not necessarily care what happens to the criminal element. So it begets opportunity to be taken advantage of by criminals and by corrupt prison officers. And yes, at the end of the day, just like customs, it's not just the low-level people. They have to be the upper-level people who, at the very least, turn a blind eye and allow things to happen. And this is one of the things. The problem is, show me a politician that will have the will to try and improve the situation. Now, one of the problems that we have is the lack of accountability goes hand in hand to our budgetary restrictions, and that then goes back to how the budget's being managed and the fact that the government does not necessarily want to put extra money into things. That's why we don't have the scanners. Part of it is because the people who work in those positions don't necessarily want the scanners. They don't want to have to go through that. They like the things the way they are for whatever reason, whether it allows them to operate how they want to operate, whether it allows them to allow for certain things that they might want to allow at times, or whether they just don't want to have to be retrained. And maybe in some cases, we underestimate our functional illiterate, right? Maybe in some cases, our education system has failed members of our population to the point where they feel incapable of learning how to operate a machine. In the age where everybody has a machine in their pocket, a complex computer in your pocket, right? Operating a scanner now is not like what it would have been in the 1960s. or the 1970s or the 1980s or whatever, right? I even know if they had scanners in the 1960s, but you know what I mean. So I agree with you. Something needs to be done with the prison service. Something immediate, because it has gone to the point where we don't see police officers being shot at on a regular basis, but it seems as though we see prison officers being shot at. Their involvement to whatever degree, it's not that they're outright gangsters themselves, but they're involved in things to get them shot at, or, heaven forbid, these are the good officers that don't want to take the bribes that get attacked. Right? It could be both. So I agree with you there. With regards to the state of emergency, in the long run, yeah, I don't have good expectations that it will break up the gangs, to be honest. You know, and I don't think the population, like, I think it's semantics there, right, with regards to expectations. We're more debating the semantics of what the expectations are, of what expectations means in this situation, and then also debating what the expectations are. But I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you at the end of the day. I don't think we're going to get what we want or what we wish we could get from it. I don't know if it's the last big tool. The problem is, we really have not seen any sort of new strategies. We haven't. They say intelligence-led policing and strategies and blah, 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 and plans and blah. Like, we literally have not seen anything new. We have literally not seen our law enforcement and national security apparatus do anything that we could point to, because maybe behind the scenes they have done some things, but anything that we could point to that has been new and innovative, we have not seen it. And to some extent, within the bounds of legality that does not infringe on people's rights, or at least not to the point that is beyond the pale for a state of emergency. But even take the state of emergency out, we could do this without a state of emergency. Radical and innovative strategies, procedures, techniques, and methods to deal with crime. We have not seen that being done. Radical does not mean illegal, reckless. Radical could mean things that are not normal, that are not typical, that are not what we've done before, that are outside of the box, right? Radical could mean getting more foreign help, but not just getting the help, but how the help is brought in, what form it comes in. Some people might say, oh, but our sovereignty. Listen, if sovereignty leads, sovereignty should not be so sacrosanct that we will watch the ship sink, but sovereignty. You know, I have no issue, because one of the things that I am jealous of with regards to American cities that share our population is they have a federal law enforcement system on top of their city and state law enforcement system that help backstop each other, and we don't have that. We have something to the equivalent of a city police force trying to deal with transnational crime. Whereas cities like Miami and New York have city police, potentially state police, federal investigative bureaus, more than one, to deal with large-scale international crime. Now the question is why we don't have the political will to try and figure out a way to let us get a big brother to try and deal with some of the, because let's be real, the police service will never be able to stop transnational crime, and our geographical location by default means we're going to be a gateway to the world for drugs. Period. End of story. The end. And as long as that happens, the illegal dollars that flow into this country will always make crime too profitable and too much of a tall order for our little law enforcement agency to properly, completely address. We could address some of it, and we could complain about the fact that to some extent we're not doing enough. But then there will always be a part that we might need help to deal with. And part of the not doing enough is not getting enough help to deal with that threat. And believe me, it is a threat to our nation. Because I don't want to wait until we reach the point of no return. And then there will be another country that is at the precipice of failure in the Caribbean. And then somebody will have to be like what Dr. Rowley said, Haiti, we're sorry, we'll have to get me a motley successor however many years down the line. Trinidad, we're sorry. Tobago, we're sorry. We couldn't do more for you. You who once was the big player on the block now. Hey, Rome wasn't built in a day, it didn't fall in a day either. But the Roman Empire, it ain't here. The British Empire, that ain't here either. The Holy Roman Empire, how many of you even know what that is? I'll give you a hint. It's not necessarily based in Rome. That ain't here either. And so on and so on. Back to the beginning, Professor made a statement about the environment that helped foster the gangs. Part of that needs long-term solutions, and at the end of the day, it is what it is. Politicians are de-incentivized from long-term considerations and are incentivized to only look at short-term things because short-term initiatives help them win the next election. Short-term initiatives are what the people ask for because they want the money now. They want the freeness now, they want the help now, and they are not thinking about the investment into the future. That's why our sovereign wealth fund, the HSF, is as small as it is, despite the government's attempt to hype out, oh, look how good it's doing. Nah. Nah. We dropped the ball on that one, and our children's children will be paying the opportunity cost of that. Believe that. We are over time, so thanks to all of the callers for calling in and voicing their opinion. Folks, make today as good of a day as you can. Remember your allegiance to each other and to this republic above all other factions and tribes. It's nice to be nice to each other. And I wish I could have said that to the drivers that cut me off and made me late this morning. They won't hear this message. But you know what? I didn't retaliate. I didn't have a road rage incident. I just had to deal with it safely. So I'll encourage you to do so throughout your day. Stay safe. Try to keep everybody else around you safe, and we will see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color dry sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.